Hi everybody, and welcome to the first in a series of talks regards changes we're all going to experience next year across the recruitment and payroll landscape. Today I'd like to welcome Crawford Temple. Crawford is the Chief Executive of Professional Passport, and today we're going to be discussing quite a lot of noise that's happened regards Joint and Several Liability, which comes into place in April 2026. Crawford, if we could just start, just give us a little bit of background to why the legislation came in and what it hopes to address.
All right, John. Thank you. Legislation came in, we've seen increasing volumes of disguised remuneration within the sector, and that's been increasing over the last few years. It was sort of partly triggered by changes with off-payroll working, which created this cliff edge drop in people's earnings as they were moved out of their own companies into umbrellas as a result of the off-payroll working rules. And that opened up this vacuum for disguised remuneration to come in and offer schemes that meant people weren't reducing their income as much as possible. That's become a major part and feature of the market. Part of that is even though the revenue had their RTI information, they'd also implemented employment intermediary reporting. It was clear they weren't using it, and so people were just operating in a way that was the Wild West to all intents and purposes. And through that period, we've experienced it. We've seen fake information, fraudulent documentation, everything you could possibly imagine. And they're doing it in a way where they're learning and getting more astute at what they're doing to disguise the reality of what's going on. The revenue have seen this and actually now are starting to take action. They're doing things that we were saying they should have been doing 6 years ago, and if they were, the market wouldn't have got to this position. But because it did get to that position, it then hit the point where they had to take action. The action that they've taken, I think, initially surprised people because there were a number of options that were presented to the sector, and the option that they took was the one that was the least expected option for them to take. And it was announced by Rachel Reeves that that was the direction they were going. And from that, we've seen Joint and Several Liability roll out as the way in which they're going to address it, which basically means if an umbrella fails to pay the required levels of PAYE correctly, then that liability sits with either the recruitment company that is contracting to the end client, so the lead recruitment company, which addresses the issue of complex supply chains, or if there's no recruitment company in the process, it sits with the end client where those companies fail to address it. So the revenue had highlighted certain sectors where things were prevalent, disguised remuneration was prevalent, and those areas have really got a big job to do. Some of the disguised remuneration schemes have been offering huge amounts of money to encourage people to introduce workers to them, and that's both at company level and consultant level in recruitment companies. And obviously, all of a sudden, that's going to stop and impact those businesses, and they need to ensure they've got robust processes and procedures in place, because any spaces that are available will be played, and I'm sure we're going to see that roll out.
So there's going to be big changes coming.
Massive change. I think a lot of people, when we looked at the legislation when it came out, we were surprised at how quickly other firms were coming out going, we've got this sorted, don't worry about it. And we're looking at it thinking, but they haven't. And I don't think a lot of people that pressed for the changes didn't fully appreciate how big this was. They just saw it as, we can say to an agency and prove to them it's been paid and there's no problem at all. And the problem is that with the way the legislation is written, it's not as simple as just saying, we can prove something. Yeah. You've got to actually take it right to the start point to protect you. Otherwise, you are going to end up, once you find out that it isn't proved, you've got the liability and there's nothing you can do about it. So it's quite a seismic change from recruitment companies. I think the natural instinct for business when they're faced with change is to try and find something that is very similar to what they're used to. And hopefully that does the job. And actually, I think there will be some surprises because it is a totally different approach that's now needed.
In terms of when you're talking about surprises, then can you nail down the key points then of this legislation for the recruitment sector, what they need to consider?
Yeah, I think we've been promoting quite heavily the HMRC webinars that have been run. There's been 3 of them so far. There's another one due in January. If people haven't been on them, then I would highly recommend it, because within the webinars, they're not only overviewing HMRC's position on the legislation, but there's an opportunity to ask questions, and the revenue will answer them. And what I've been pleasantly surprised about in the latest round of those webinars is the answers are very, very straightforward. In the olden days, the revenue would answer something and you'd have to take it to a lawyer and get it interpreted. With these sessions, they are simple yes and no's and very straightforward answers. We've captured all the Q&As from all the previous sessions. So if anyone wants the examples of all the Q&As, all they've got to do is message me or email, and we can provide a copy of that without any commentary around it, and you can make your own conclusion. A lot of people that have seen them have basically had their eyes open and went, wow, this is really clear cut. So the revenue have been very clear. And the key things really are messaging and where some of the complexity is in the marketplace is there's a lot of people talking about due diligence and all of these checks and balances and everything you've got to do. And the revenue are very clear that due diligence is no more than a risk profiling process in relation to JSL. And it's used to try and identify where you can lower your risk and deal with companies that maybe have a lower risk. In terms of if something goes wrong, it holds 0 weight in relation to an excuse against joint and several liability. Excuse me. Joint and several liability. There is no excuse. So the simple fact is, if there's a liability, it's going to go to the agency to settle that liability. Full stop, no excuse, or the relevant party, to be more accurate. So I think people have got to really understand what each element means, and the revenues Q&As make that very clear. So I think there was one question that was asked in the 3rd webinar where it was, if we do all of the due diligence as set out on the .gov.uk website in line with the revenue's expectations and we get a liability, will that provide an excuse? And the revenue just went, no. So you can do a ton of work, employ extra staff to carry out all these checks and continually do these checks, or there's an alternative route, which is just settling that liability direct with the revenue. And that's where the difference occurs. And the reason why we were later into the market was to ensure that we'd understood it correctly, tested that understanding, and basically came out with a proposition that says, if you don't want to have all that pressure and expense of doing all the due diligence and all those checks on an ongoing basis, you can just settle that liability directly, and that neutralises JSL. And the revenue in those webinars have been very clear that if you settle as the relevant party directly with the revenue for any liabilities, and something goes wrong with that umbrella, you've settled it, and therefore there's no comeback to you.
And with the webinars, for the people who have missed them, they're going to be holding future ones as well, aren't they?
Yeah, I know there's excuse me, I know there's another one booked for January, which will promote that one as well through our LinkedIn channel. So if you haven't attended, I would strongly recommend it, because and then I think the timing of that one is quite good, because companies are now getting their head around it. They're understanding some of the differences between the propositions that are being offered, And so what I would say is go along to that webinar armed with some questions that you just want to clarify to confirm your final position and thought process, and ask it of the revenue.
Yeah.
Then you're going to get the absolute position from them in relation to it.
Now, you said the message we're getting here is about the simplicity of this and the yes and no very much that you're getting from the revenue. So why is there so much noise and complexity around this?
Okay,
Take your time.
Yeah. So JSL, Joint and Several Liability, is a simple yes or no answer. So is there a liability, yes or no? If there is no liability, then obviously there is no JSL, and everything carries on brilliantly. If there is a liability, JSL kicks in and the agency gets it. It's as simple as that.
Okay.
But the reason why there is so much confusion and mixed messaging around it is because when we looked at it, a lot of the companies out there, a lot of the offerings out there, look at what I call after the event checks. So there are some fundamental stages that are perhaps missed in those checks. So I think everyone is going to continue with operational processes and procedures reviews for the companies. That doesn't hold any weight in relation to joint and several liability, but there is other legislation that requires a much wider piece around supply chain due diligence. And so that's why those will still be relevant. One of the key points for those as well is with the Fair Work Agency coming into play next year, there's likely to be an increased focus on the minutiae of detail around how an umbrella operates. And I think one of the threats that could emerge, not directly as JSL, but could affect JSL, is employment tribunals where things aren't done right. We've already seen some actions with employment tribunals, and with some of those, if they were lead cases with another case, series of cases following, that could amount to some quite big liabilities. And through the employment tribunal, if there were big liabilities, then obviously that can impact an umbrella company and may result in other liabilities around PAYE that would be triggered under JSL. So the accuracy and detail around how umbrellas are operating through the whole process becomes critical. So those operational processes and procedures reviews will be essential to carry on and ensure that broader supply chain compliance. The next part of it is all about the checks that you're doing. So with JSL being a yes or no answer, you've got an element where you've now got a choice. You have a choice where you can say, well, we're going to rely on after the event checks that looks at a payslip and make sure all the calculations on a payslip are correct, matches those to the RTI return, and then ultimately matches those to the payment of that liability. Where someone selects that, what they need to understand is the payroll cycle. And the PAYE cycle means that you're probably running for 8 weeks before you can get that confirmation of the payment. So if you imagine that you're running a payroll that has £20,000 of liability every week, that means by the time you've got a verification that the previous month has been settled, you're up at about £160,000 of liability. When that liability is then settled for the first month, you're still holding £80,000 to £100,000 of liability. So it never, in those cycles, you've never got zero. So if at any point there is a problem, you will always have a liability. It depends on the timing of the event as to what the size of that liability could be. So there is an element there that says if you're happy to hold that potential risk, then that will work fine. And there'll be companies that go down that road.
Yeah.
The thing I would say around it is that those after event checks do allow companies to come in and manipulate the system. The thing for me is that you have to validate payments based on the amount of money that the agency sends to the umbrella, not based on what is reported on a payslip, because the gap between those two can allow disguised remunerations to exist. And so if an agency sends £6,000 for a worker, and the payslip reports £4,500, all the calculations on the payslip may well be correct, but there's a £1,500 gap, and where's that £1,500 gone? So unless you're actually going to go through and audit every single payslip that's provided on those services, you're not going to spot any of those gaps. And it may well be a considerable time before the revenue picks that up. If we look at their current processes, it's probably going to be 6 months before they pick it up. When it's picked up, they can wind that clock back, and even though you've received reports to say, yes, the PAYE's been reported and paid, when the revenue picks up those shortfalls, then suddenly you've got 6 months of unreported earnings and unreported PAYE that will end up as a JSL liability coming to the relevant party. So there's a space, and you've got to be aware of these spaces that can be played, because the disguised remuneration schemes are making so much money in the marketplace today, they are not just going to switch off tomorrow. They are going to find ways. So you will be offered, we've got this new offering that gets round JSL, and that's important to understand, because when you look at the change in the final legislation that's been produced, the revenues changes around that are all around what they call the purported umbrella. And what they're doing with those changes is they're effectively widening the scope and widening their ability to find anything that's doing what it shouldn't be doing, and call it an umbrella company and apply those changes. So recruitment companies need to be very conscious about the offerings that they've got and new offerings into the market. So after the event check-in, fine if you accept the scope of it, and you'll probably need to have additional resources to validate all of that information that you're getting and checking and balancing it. Without that, you are exposed to the vulnerabilities. There'll be, because of the way umbrellas work, a lot of them have been in business for a while. A lot of them have very strong relationships with recruitment companies. And some of the recruitment companies will be very happy just carrying on with those relationships. They may be wanting an operational process and procedures review to help them with the due diligence side of it, but they'll be happy based on a relationship basis. And then what we'll also find in the market is companies that just don't want the risk of a liability. And that's where the complexity comes into it. When JSL came out, we recognised that the only way you can neutralise it is for the relevant party to settle the PAYE. The problem in the sector, and the reason why this isn't widely promoted in the sector, is that none of the payroll software is designed or built to be able to report in line with the requirements for JSL, particularly where you have a contractor who's got multiple assignments. So they work on a basis of cumulative pay. So they look at the total pay for that worker in that period and report that as one payment. That doesn't work under JSL, where you've got multiple contractors. You have to do what's called split reporting. And there is no payroll software in the sector that does split reporting. So we've had to build it. It was something we had already underway because we'd looked at various options previously. And so we had lots of different options depending on which way the legislation went. And obviously when we understood the way it went, we switched off those that were irrelevant and continued down the development road on those that were relevant. And that's why we were quite surprised when it first came out that sort of 2 days later there were people doing webinars saying, we've got it sorted, it's all sorted. You know, we can absolutely assure you that you've got no liability or no risk if you use this process or that process or whatever it was. And at some point we were doubting ourselves as to whether we got it right, because a lot of these presentations were so exact in their claims that we thought maybe we have got this wrong. So we went through a significant element of checking. So we had barristers looking at it. and giving us their opinion as to whether this worked. We had some of the top law firms within the sector have a look at it, and we were surprised that how few people had worked out that actually the way to neutralise it is just to settle that liability.
So you've gone a different direction.
Yeah,
in
we've
terms of your
gone
approach.
this route where we can give the agency a complete audit trail for each worker through each umbrella company, and all the information matches. So the information that's given to the worker on their payslip, the information that's given to the revenue through RTI returns, and the information given to the agency about the liabilities and what to settle, all reconciles to the penny. So everyone has got exactly the right information, and it can all be reconciled. And on that basis, that the revenue can then see that there is no liability, and on the Q&As they've confirmed that if you've settled it and there is no liability, there's nothing for them to pursue. Now the other the other important factor with it, which a lot of people don't seem to have picked up, and this is really critical, is when you send your money to an umbrella, as you do currently, you send all the money through to the umbrella and the umbrella deals with it. The moment that money goes into the umbrella company, it stops being identified as a particular agency's money. It just goes into a big pot that's the umbrella's money. The RTI return is just a big number for all of the tax that's applicable, and it's not discernible by individual agency. So where there's a shortfall, even though the agency sent all the money to the umbrella, where a shortfall occurs, they can't create an audit trail of how their money's been settled. Excuse me. And so they'll pick up this share of liability up to whatever should have been settled. The thing that Fortis does, what we've designed it to do, is because you're sending the money for the worker's pay to the umbrella company, that's fine, the worker gets paid. And because we've created this audit trail underneath it that shows all the calculations and the agency is paying that, the critical part is the agency paying to the revenue under the umbrella's PAYE code. That completes that audit trail, and that's what allows the agency to demonstrate that they've settled their liability. Without that part of the process, so you'll see some of the commentators are saying, well, the umbrellas can just pay the PAYE weekly. Well, they can. They can pay the PAYE weekly, but unless they're doing it for every single one of their clients, then it still won't work because it's not the agency's PAYE, it's just an element of this overall RTI. And what we've been able to do is design this process that makes it distinguishable as your PAYE is a recruitment company and you're in complete control. And if we look back, one of the things that we were trying to resolve when we were looking at solving this problem, when you look back over the last few years of umbrella companies where there have been problems, it's often been because they've agreed commercial terms and something's gone wrong with those commercial terms. So they may have offered credit terms to an agency and the agency's failed to settle it. And where that's happened, it's created a cash flow shortfall for them, and in some cases made them insolvent, and they've had to go under. And so the problem where you're sending all the money into the umbrella is you don't know all of the commercial relationships that umbrella's got or credit terms they're being offered. And so if someone else triggers that problem and creates a shortfall, you're picking up that liability.
That's a fair point.
What we've done with Fortis is when you've settled your liability, it doesn't matter about the other commercial terms because your liability is settled and you can demonstrate it to the revenue. So even if the umbrella company somewhere along the line has got commercial terms and those commercial terms fail, it doesn't affect you because you can show your liability has been settled. And that's the critical part, and the part that I think some of the nuances within the legislation haven't been fully understood yet. I think it's emerging and people are beginning to question it.
Yep.
But there's some very fine detail points that actually when you get into them, it's relatively straightforward for an agency to protect themselves completely against joint and several liability. But it's also very easy for them to leave themselves exposed to joint and several liability.
With this exposure, obviously we're hearing about insurance products
All right,
that
yeah.
are being put out there in the market to protect against these liabilities. What's your thoughts on that?
The first thing is if someone is presenting an insurance product to protect you against liabilities, that's your first clue that it doesn't do what it says on the tin.
Okay.
Because if you've neutralised JSL, there can't be a liability, and therefore for an insurance product to work, there has to be a risk that you're insuring against. And if there is no risk because you've paid it, then you can't insure it.
Yeah.
The other factor is that I think with the insurance is the terms. We've seen insurance in the sector for many years. It's been a common feature. And one of the common aspects of the insurance is, in a lot of cases, the way it's written is it doesn't pay out unless you've done everything correctly, in which case you haven't got a liability.
Yeah.
And so whilst I think some of the smaller recruitment companies maybe take comfort in thinking there's an insurance policy that's protecting them, it certainly shouldn't be relied upon in a way that means they haven't got to worry. If you think about some of the size of the liabilities that could arise, no insurance company is going to write those checks out in 5 minutes.
Okay.
And therefore, and it also doesn't change who's liable for them. So if the revenue goes, there's a shortfall, here's the bill, Mr. Agency or relevant party. Excuse me, picked up a little bit of a cough. If the agency gets that liability, then they're going to have to pay it. And in a lot of times, they'll be paying it before they find out whether the insurance company will even accept the claim.
Yes. Yeah.
There's also, within insurance, there's two ways a policy can be written. It can be written where you're insured for the period you've bought the insurance for, or it can be insured where you're only insured if you have an active policy at the time that the claim comes in. Most insurance we've seen historically in the sector, you have to have an active policy at the point the claim comes in.
Yep.
And the danger and the threat with that is that what can happen is if an insurance company, because they want to make money, and if an insurance company gets claims that are beyond what their underwriting expectations were, they'll just stop offering that policy. And so everyone that's relied on it could find themselves unable to renew a policy and without insurance. So insurance really, if that's your answer, then I think it's a dangerous route to go down. Okay. I think there are simpler ways to deal with it. In just, we joke JSL means just settle the liability. Yep. So, if you just settle that liability and you've got the full documented audit trail, you haven't got a liability.
Okay. So then alongside with the insurance, we're also hearing about indemnities as well,
Yep.
which we've heard in the past, this sort of thing, with agencies having contractors indemnify them as a possible solution. Do you see that as workable as well?
If the agency is trying to get a contractor to indemnify them, I think that's a difficult one to achieve. There's lots of precedents in contract law, and the agency doesn't have that direct contractual relationship with the contractor. So there's a lot of hurdles and complexities to get over to achieve that. And it's got to be explicitly pointed out to a contractor for it to even stand a chance of happening. So I'm not sure that's a starter. The revenue in their initial presentations were talking about agencies getting indemnities from umbrella companies if there was a shortfall. The problem is when you look at the cycle, the umbrella company will know well in advance before an agency if there's likely to be a problem or a liability. And therefore you've got a position where by the time that liability arises, depending on who's holding the indemnity, it's only as good as what sat there, and you could find that nothing sat there. So once again, I think relying on those external documents and paperwork is not probably the right answer, and is going to leave you in a higher risk profile setting than a lot of the company. And when you look at it, the big companies are very clear they want to remove the liability. They don't want that sat in the supply chain. Some of the challenges with the MSPs So the managed service providers will have complex supply chains where they've got agencies underneath them who are contracting with the umbrellas. And one of the challenges they've got is making sure that those agencies underneath them are complying with their contractual arrangements in terms of using certain providers and how they go about it. Some of the conversations we're having with big MSPs are now at the point where some of them are going to move towards, we don't want the liability, and they'll be looking for the agencies in the supply chain to be settling those liabilities directly with the revenue, in line with what we've been saying all along through Fortis, because they can then manage that process. They have visibility of that process through Fortis, and it makes their role easier in managing that supply chain compliance where you've got a complex supply chain.
Now, safe to say you've done this for a few years. And you've seen things, we've had IR35, we've had MSC, all that sort of thing, we've come through it. Just in terms of the overall JSL and the impact you feel this is going to have on the umbrella sector moving forward now, what are the main things to pull from this?
I think moving forward, if we look short term, I think people really need to understand these nuances within the legislation. You know, we've spent a lot of time and energy understanding it to get it right. You know, the old world of an accreditation is gone.
Okay.
So we still get people going, oh, how do we be accredited? Well, it isn't an accreditation anymore. You've got a review of the processes and procedures, but that doesn't equal an accreditation. The disguised remuneration schemes through fraudulent documents have been able to manipulate accreditations, and we've all suffered from that, which is probably one of the reasons why things had to change. So the new world is all about understanding the nuances of JSL and making sure that whatever your answer is aligned to what your risk profiling is, and accepting that basis. So there's a big learning curve, and I'm not sure all of the companies have appreciated the size of that change that they face yet. But what we are seeing day on day on day is more and more people where they're going, I get this now.
Okay.
Oh yeah, this is different to what I thought. So, you know, we're seeing people who have made decisions to go one direction and now going, actually, now I understand this, that probably isn't aligned to what I want to achieve. I'm going to go this way. So I think there's that aspect. I think in terms of as we move through it, and the revenues definitely sharpened their game in looking at the disguised remuneration schemes. We're going to see more disguised remuneration schemes getting unmasked. And what seems to be happening now is they'll find one, and we've been saying for a long time, it's almost like organised crime groups, the way they're setting these up, where there's someone who's just setting up loads of them and they're all connected doing the same thing. What the revenues seem to be finding now is those groups and connecting them. So where they find one, you're likely to find the emergence of 3, 4 or 5 coming out.
Where they're sharpening their tools, like you're saying, if we were to do a prediction for the next 12 months, are you expecting that to increase then?
I think at the minute, the disguised remuneration schemes see they've got a sell-by date.
Okay.
So they want to make as much as they possibly can before April and fill their boots. I think recruitment companies have got to be really careful, because with the revenue sharpening their game, it's going to be a really hard argument for a recruitment company to say we didn't know anything about it if they're copping a load of money from these schemes. And we're seeing some big numbers coming through.
Yep.
That sort of kills all of the argument of we've done these checks or we're relying on this or we're relying on that if you've got big money flowing into the company. So I think there'll be, up until April, the Wild West is going to continue.
Okay.
And that will be down to how many recruitment companies are still prepared to allow these things to exist in the supply chain, because I'm sure a lot of them are aware of it. Post-April, it's harder to predict, but with the amount of money and the size of these groups that are running these disguised remuneration schemes, they're not just going to disappear. They're going to find new ways of doing it. And it's how do you prevent a system from being duped
Yeah.
by them. And one of the routes we went is ensuring that our software is our software. We're getting the information direct from the recruitment company. We're not just checking a pay slip. We're looking at the top level numbers.
Yep.
We're currently going through verification with the revenue on the software to make sure it's running all the calculations correctly. So I'm hoping, touch wood, that in the not too distant future, or even by the time this goes out, we'll already have that verified
Yes.
by HMRC, which is an important tool for anyone looking to rely on it, because you can say, well, actually, this is verified by HMRC, the software. So that's an important aspect. And you're all the time you're looking and saying, right, how do these people play these spaces? How will they dupe these systems? We've talked to the revenue in quite a lot of detail about the PAYE reference we'll have for Fortis. So we've set it up so that each umbrella company will have its own unique reference for the Fortis system. So they effectively have two employer references, one for the use through Fortis and one for anyone who doesn't want to use Fortis and go through a different system. And there are checks and balances within that we've discussed with the revenue to make sure these things go through and are all they understand in issuing that number. There's a Fortis number and what that looks like and how it operates. So we've done a lot of work in the background to make sure all of these things tie together and deliver an answer that we're confident works going forward in the most simple way. If these DR schemes are successful in finding new ways to dupe the market or new processes to get themselves into the market and continue existing and making the massive amounts of money they're making, it depends how they do it, but it will have an impact on the market. Because if someone gets hit 3 months in or 4 months in with a big liability, that will be news across the whole marketplace, and that will certainly rock the market and people's decisions. And I think umbrellas have got a really important role to play, especially when you look at things like the Fair Work Agency and the Employment Rights Bill and all those things that are coming over the horizon. The umbrella gives really good value to the recruitment companies. It's just in the new world, it's got to look very different, because recruitment companies, I think it would be unfair for them to still be expecting big paybacks from umbrella companies. Umbrellas need to make their money. They need the volume to exist. So, if all of a sudden there's a big decision in the market that we're moving away from umbrella companies, then that will cause its own ripples in the market. There are a couple of people saying, we might operate their own PAYE, but when you look at those companies, they're companies that already operate the PAYE, and only a relatively small number of their workers go through umbrellas. So, they're just going to do business as normal for them. The people that have been using umbrellas as a significant answer for their workforce, I think will continue to do so, and I think umbrellas still offer great value for money. I think what we've got to make sure is that the process works for both the umbrella and the agency, because I think the way there's been a fight for some of the business over the last couple of years has meant people are agreeing things that aren't really great commercial deals. There's a number. I think what we underestimated was the volume of umbrellas that are using revenue money for cash flow. That's part of the reason why we've had negativity against this offering, because obviously if the agency is paying direct to the revenue, then that's 7 weeks of cash flow that the umbrella hasn't got that money for. And I get that, but it's also even more reason why you should use Fortis, because if the umbrellas are too reliant on revenue money for cash flow and they've got commercial terms, then that puts them in a weaker position, and therefore you've got a higher risk with them. So, there's a balancing of it, and I think there's a transition this market's got to go through to rebalance everything and see where it ends up. But I do think, there's no doubt for me that umbrellas offer high value into the sector.
Okay, it's definitely a timescale. Crawford, thank you.
It's no problem at all.
Okay, guys, I think the feedback from that is obviously to get your ducks in a row. So the product is Professional Passport Fortis. If it's something you are interested in learning about, there'll be links in the video and you can reach out to Crawford and his team with any questions. Don't forget HMRC's next webinar will be in January. The advice from Crawford is please attend. And if you've got any questions, any queries, please feel free to reach out to the team. Thank you.